Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I am doing so well today, Tim. I hope everyone out there who's listening, I hope they're doing just as well as I'm doing. And a lot of this good feeling comes from the conversation that we had just a couple of days ago with this wonderful woman. She's searching for her mom, but it gets a lot more deeper and a lot more spiritual, which I totally appreciate. And I think the listeners will as well. But Tim, I want to appreciate how you are. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks a lot for asking. Yeah, so in this episode, we speak with Carolyn DeFord. She is the daughter of Leona Kinsey, who has been missing since 1999 from Grande, Oregon. And we produced a part one on Leona's case with Lieutenant Hayes of the Grande Police Department. So you may want to scroll back. It's one of our latest episodes. Scroll back a few to hear that one. But this is with Leona's daughter, Carolyn. And it's obviously a little bit of a different vibe. We get an emotional take on Leona's disappearance.
And I just love it when these series of episodes come together where we can have law enforcement on talking about the details and the motivation that law enforcement has to bring answers to the family. But like you just said, this one has a different feel to it. It is incredibly emotional, but Carolyn really keeps it together and so well articulates the story. And there's a moment here that I think everyone's going to take something different away from, where she tells a story about her and her mom and they're talking about death. And without giving anything away, you really need to listen to that, because it's one of the first times a guest has come on and told a story like that. Because when we heard it, we had nothing after. It was just such an amazing moment.
Yeah, it really was. And let us know what you think on social media at Missing CSM. And we were introduced to Carolyn by the Light the Way organization. And you can check out everything that Light the Way does at their website, lightthewaymissing.com. Leona has brown hair, brown eyes, is 5'2", 110 pounds, and was 46 years old at the time of her disappearance. And there is currently a reward for information leading to Leona Kinsey's whereabouts in this case. So if you have any information, please call the Grande Police Department at 541-963-1017.
And Tim, before we break for a commercial and return with Carolyn, I just want to wish you and yours and all of our listeners a happy Thanksgiving.
Happy holiday to you, Lance, and happy holiday to our listeners. Thanks a lot for listening to this. We really appreciate you. We'll be right back with Carolyn. Welcome to the podcast, Carolyn. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on, and I'm so glad that we were finally able to do this interview. It's been a long time coming. We were connected through the wonderful organization, Light the Way Missing. Can you talk to us about who you are, not only your work with Light the Way and why you're connected to them, but you're also very, 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 I can't emphasize it enough, heavily involved in the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement in your area. So for anyone who doesn't know you, can you please fill our listeners in on exactly who you are and what you do?
My name is Carolyn DeFord. I am a Puyallup tribal member. I also have Nisqually and Cowlitz tribal descendancy on my mother's side and Scottish, Irish, French on my father's side. I currently live and reside in the South Puget Sound area in Nisqually Tribal Territory, and I work for the Puyallup Tribe of Indians in the Community Domestic Violence Advocacy Program as their anti-trafficking program manager and MMIWP advocate. My mother, Leona Kinsey, went missing October 25th, 1999, so we're approaching that 25-year anniversary of her disappearance. Just a couple of years after that, my cousin Lenore Davis Lawrence was murdered, and so she was responding to a call for help from a friend who was experiencing domestic violence. Both of those experiences really shook my family, especially my aunties and my matriarchs who lost their daughter and niece and their sister within a very short period of time. I started doing advocacy for families of missing, just families of missing, very organically. I didn't realize what I was doing was advocacy. It was empathy to me. I would just reach out to other families who had loved ones missing on, back then it was MySpace, and Facebook had kind of started creeping in a little bit. And I was learning that families needed the same thing that I did. We needed to talk, but there was nowhere to talk about it. And I often protected my family from these emotions by not talking about it with them. And I think they protected me, the same way from these hard emotions by not talking about it with me. If I cried, they would stop. If they cried, I would stop. But we didn't realize, or at least I didn't realize, that we needed to cry. We needed to get it out. We needed to process our story and how we felt and how it impacted us and our grief. And, other families needed that too. And so that was kind of how I got started into the advocacy side of things. I currently sit on the Washington State Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Peoples Task Force as the co-chair for the families representation in the subcommittee, family subcommittee. I've also volunteered my time with Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women USA as an admin on their Facebook page and doing outreach to families who may need awareness and help creating posters and just support getting the word out. In 2017, I started Missing and Murdered Native Americans, which is we're a couple of women volunteers who have missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And we volunteer our time and resources and, out of pocket to support families in any way that we can. Primarily at this time, it's through social media outreach and connection to resources and referral and just emotional support.
It's an amazing collection of work that you do. And you said so eloquently that you didn't realize you were doing advocacy because it was coming from more of an empathetic place. And I'm just wondering, with your background and your culture, that must have had a huge impact or a huge influence on your empathetic qualities. Is that pretty accurate?
I think so. It also made me still feel very strongly that connecting with other families, being, for lack of better words, being what I needed somebody and there was no one, kind of has made this whole experience have some kind of a sense of purpose, if that sounds right, but it's not in vain. I'm not letting this happen. I'm not letting this happen and not benefit somebody.
Right.
I'm curious, is there some crossover in your work in human trafficking and in domestic violence?
Oh, this is a whole nother podcast. We could go on for days, but domestic violence, often trafficking survivors are groomed and lured by romantic partners or the potential for love. There's that connection, that romantic connection and the domestic violence intimate partner connection to trafficking, but also nearly 62% of our trafficking survivors nationwide have been lured into trafficking, prostitution, or sex work by somebody that they know, a family member, an intimate partner, somebody who is close to them. And so often that connection itself is a domestic violence connection.
And you're so right that this is a completely different or separate but related podcast episode. We speak with family members and especially parents, mothers who will talk to us about their daughter who's missing, and it's just so clearly evident that the missing part of it was due to the domestic violence. I mean, there's so much evidence that this is a direct link. And this question is probably nothing that any one of us can answer, but do you find it to be the same case that when you're working with these families, all of this evidence had been present, but just very subtle leading up to a disappearance or a moment of abuse that's so significant it sends somebody to the hospital?
Yeah, I think trafficking and domestic violence probably are integral in 85-90% of the families that I talk to, and whether we see it immediately within our family or an outsider sees some of the indicators more clearly than we do inside is a whole nother Sometimes I can see things that look like indicators, or sometimes the family has a suspicion that that this intimate partner may have been trying to engage this person in prostitution, or there's a known history of either sex work or human trafficking. But there's usually something there, and a majority of them, like, I don't have a statistic, but I can't think of any off the top of my head that there hasn't been some active addiction or substance abuse component as well.
Okay, so your mom's been missing since October 25th, 1999. Can you tell us about her? What's she like?
My mom was funny. She was compassionate. She was the kind of person that would do without to give to others. She was creative and artistic and independent. She didn't count on anybody for anything. She would always say, I'll do it myself, or you can do it yourself. If I would talk about needing help with something, she'd say, you don't need help with that. You can do that. So she was very independent and encouraging and empowering to me, to watch my mom do things that you wouldn't think that 100-pound, 5'3" little woman would be doing. She loved the outdoors, hunting and fishing and just being out in the woods. She loved gardening and traditional medicines. And part of it was necessity. We didn't have a lot of money, but our freezer was full of things that, food that my parents had harvested or gathered. And so we ate a very healthy, whole diet. My mom had a goofy, silly sense of humor. And, she always had nicknames for people, and people always thought that was funny. Like, where did she get that? I had one friend that she called Squeak, and we don't know where she came up with that one, but she did. My mom also struggled with her own issues. She was a victim of sexual assault and domestic violence. She coped with that, in the not the most healthy way, and she struggled with substance abuse for several years, and she fought a lot against that. She went to treatment and was seeking treatment at the time of her disappearance. And, it wasn't until I got older and I started looking at my mom's story from an advocate lens, not from a daughter lens. And my mom fought for her recovery. She really did want to be clean and want to be there for her family and her grandkids. And I used to try and keep that. I was raised to keep those skeletons in the closet. You don't talk about addiction in your family. You just don't talk about it. I realized I wasn't protecting anybody. I wasn't helping anybody by not being real. My mom's not the only one. I'm not the only family member who has had to grow up seeing and witnessing their loved one struggle. So I try to be as honest as I can about it, while I still, there's still that kind of stigma or stereotype about not talking about it, and making sure that what I say isn't able to be twisted into a victim blaming, situation.
Yeah. One of the major points that we always try to emphasize is that the person who's missing, typically the circumstances of any addiction or any sort of vice, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters in the investigation, but it should never matter in how the public is perceiving this person who's missing, because it's family members who are looking, and it's family members who are constantly reminded, and the wound is always open. And the addiction and the vice, leave that to the police. Like, leave that to the people who are investigating it, because it really shouldn't matter when you're looking at it from like a public point of view. But it takes like a hugely strong person to go to recovery, to go to rehab, to say, I have a problem. Just admitting it and saying it out loud is way stronger than hiding it and being secretive about your addiction. So it sounds like your mom obviously wanted to make herself a more healthy individual. And you were saying about how having, there's always food in the freezer, and they would, gather and they'd bring food in. And she was always saying that you could do things yourself. Where did that come from? Where was that something that she was raised to do? And I feel like that goes hand in hand with the recovery. Like, hey, I'm going to take this on myself.
Yeah, I think just culturally, we were hunters and gatherers. My mom was raised to, coming from a native family, hunting was an integral part of our culture and our way of life. And when she met my stepdad, who was an outdoorsman, he was a logger, it just kind of fell hand in hand. She was able to spend the time that she enjoyed out in the woods with him and in the forest, gathering medicines or huckleberries or blackberries or mushrooms. And culturally, I think that was a good fit for her. Independence. My mom comes from a long line of independent women. I think, my great grandmother, my grandmother, my aunties, all very, very independent and strong women. So I think, she just had that example to live up to.
And tell us about what your life was like at the time of your mom's disappearance.
I was 25 years old. I lived in Olympia, Washington, which is 5 to 6 hours away from where my mom lived, or my hometown where I grew up in Grande, Oregon. And I had 3 small children, so it wasn't really 5 or 6 hours. It was like an 8-9 hour drive by the time you stop and let them, walk and potty and get food and, all of that stuff. So I didn't go home very often. I also was as a single mom and sole provider for my family. I didn't have any extra money for trips. So tax return time, that was usually something that we would save up to do to go visit one another. My kids were, 5 and under. My daughter, 5, the oldest, 4 and 2 years old. So I had a pretty full plate. I worked full time, and my mom, she wrote regularly. She wrote a letter at least twice a month. She would send a care package about once a month, and it was always full of silly things like booger-shaped candies or candy poop or books, little talking toy keychains and stuff like that. Costume, pieces of costume, sombreros and little hats and things like that for the kids to play with. And she would always put $5 in those packages and saying, get something little for yourself, buy yourself a soda. Because we didn't have money, I didn't have the extra money to go to the gas station and get a soda. It was gas. I didn't have any money for those extras. And so that little treat of, having a couple dollars extra was always nice.
And when did you hear that your mom went missing?
I heard that she went missing on the 25th. Nancy called, and Nancy was my mom's best friend. They had been friends since I was in about 4th, 5th grade. And Nancy called and asked if my mom was here. And, she left a message at my work. That whole day was, in hindsight, it was a very spiritual day. At the moment, I just thought I was a wreck. But I woke up that morning and I cried. I cried about everything. I cried getting dressed. I cried walking out the door. I cried because I had to go pick up my kids at my dad's house. I cried because I had to go to work. I cried everything. And I didn't know why. I just thought that I was unhappy. I'm just depressed. There's so much stress and so many things going on in life that I can't keep up with. And I just wanted to be able to stay home and rest. And I couldn't. And so I got to work and I was crying when I walked in the door, and I've been crying all day. So I was puffy eyed, and my coworker said, go ahead and go home. We've got your shift covered. Don't worry about us. We're fine. Go home. And I was like, I'm just having a bad day. I'll be fine. And they asked if I had heard from Nancy, my mom's friend, that Nancy had called and left a message, and they gave Nancy my phone number. And I said, no, I haven't heard from her, but I'll be fine. They're like, well, call her first. Don't, call her before you clock in. So I called her, and she said that my mom had said the night before that she was going to come over and she was going to go meet a man named John at the store, and she would be over afterwards, and she didn't show up. And Nancy was hoping that my mom had decided to come see me, and I hadn't heard from her. She wasn't there. I told Nancy I didn't know, I don't know. She's not here. I don't know what to tell you. I'll call her, I'll call around and see if she'll, return my call. And so I was calling her and paging her, and she wasn't answering. And at that time we didn't have cell phones, but I still thought there was an explanation. Maybe she had a flat tire or a dead battery or something, something happened and she couldn't get to a payphone to call anybody. So I wasn't too worried. Nancy was more worried, and Nancy was driving around town. It's a small town. LeGrande's not very big, and a even smaller circle that my mom was a part of. And Nancy drove around looking for her and asked everybody that they knew and looked for her, for a full almost, 12 hours before she called me. And so Nancy was worried, and my mom had left the dog outside, and that was not, I moved away and the dog became the good kid. Like, my mom took care of that dog like better than a child. And there was no way she would have left the dog outside, for any amount of time more than to go to the gas station. She wouldn't have left the dog outside to go to the store and then go to Nancy's. I even questioned if she would have left it outside that time of year to go to the store. We were end of October, it was cold, and it just wasn't like her to do that. So that was kind of concerning to both of us, but I just thought there's got to be some kind of an explanation. My mom is independent.
And what was the state of her home after the realization came to be that she was in fact missing?
Her house looked like my mom was always very tidy. She's a collector of things, so she had a lot of neat things, interesting things. And so her home was full, but it was always clean and tidy. And, she, as a child, she was a housekeeper. So when I grew up, she was always cleaning houses for prominent folks in the community and took pride in keeping the house clean. So, there were a couple of things out of place and things that indicated that she didn't plan on being gone. Nothing was in disarray or anything. There was no sign of anything having been broken, but she had a full pot of coffee in the coffee pot. She had a bunch of bananas on the table, and they had started to turn brown and get old. And she had a full loaf of bread. My mom stored her cigarettes in the refrigerator, and there was a full carton of cigarettes in the refrigerator. Like, there was nothing there indicating that she had planned on leaving.
And you said that she was going to the store to meet a man named John. Is this somebody that she knew? Is this the John that is associated with her disappearance?
Yeah, John or Juan was the person of interest, but my mom called him John. I had never met him before, and I don't really know if Nancy met him, but Nancy knew of him.
So you said you never met him?
Mm-mm. I left home when I was about 21 and moved to Washington to be closer to my dad. And I was also in an unhealthy relationship, and so I was getting away from that. And my mom and I didn't share the same lifestyle as adults, and so I didn't have any real connection with any of her associates or people that she hung out with other than Nancy or people that were in her life as a child.
And how far away was the store from her home, and what type of store was it? Was it like a 7-Eleven or a supermarket?
It was at Albertsons, and it was in a small plaza. LeGrande's a small town, so we called it the mall, but there's probably only 8 little stores in it. So LeGrande was in that small plaza, and there was a gas station in the parking lot and a small restaurant in the parking lot. I think it was Skipper's, and there was a corner of that parking lot, I guess, that she would meet people at, or, park when she was meeting with John. And it was maybe not even 5 minutes from her home.
And what is an Albertsons?
It's kind of like a Safeway. It's a larger grocery store. And
so it's not, I guess, uncommon for your mom to maybe pop out and just grab something real quick and head back?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel like when she said that she was meeting this man named John, that was a way of her saying that she didn't feel safe in any way?
I don't know, because one of Nancy's concerns was that there were rumors in town the first thing Nancy, one of the first things Nancy said was that there were rumors in town that my mom was a snitch. And a couple of weeks prior to that, somebody had spray painted narc on the front of my mom's home, and my mom was really upset about it. I mean, my mom's home was a older single wide trailer, the aluminum with the hitch on the front, and had a little tip out. It wasn't anything fancy, but my mom kept it maintained. And somebody had spray painted narc on the front of that. And so my mom was really, really upset. And so Nancy was concerned that there were, people in town thought that she was a snitch. And I think that, that was a concern for my mom's well-being for Nancy. I didn't know anything about that. And then the rumor being, what I'd heard was that John was her supplier. John was where she would go to buy. And Nancy was just concerned that something might have happened.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Wow, yeah, that's a pretty extreme thing, I guess. Someone spray painting narc on the door. I guess from your conversations with Nancy, did she or your mom have any idea who they thought that was? Who did that?
No, not that I'm aware of. I don't think, if Nancy did, I didn't hear about it. But what I was told was that my mom was in contact with law enforcement. I don't know if she was involved in some kind of a bust, or she got caught with, I think, maybe pot at the time. But after that, people in my mom's circle were getting arrested. And so the rumor was, as far as Nancy was concerned, the rumor around town was that my mom was involved in that.
Because she hadn't gotten arrested?
Or because her arrest was just pot.
Right.
Everybody else had larger, bigger charges, and she just had pot. I don't know if any of that is fact. I haven't seen any arrest records or anything like that prior to my mom's disappearance to know, what, if there was anything of that nature involved, but that was the rumor.
Right. So it wasn't so much, she definitely was doing the informing, but the rumor was that she was doing the informing because of the circumstances of her arrest for just having pot on her. And do you, though, personally think that her disappearance is related to the individuals who wrote narc on the door?
I don't know. I don't know who it was. I have always felt that her disappearance was related to John, that John was involved, and that there were other people in her close circle who knew more than they came forward with, and still know more than they let on. And I think that they didn't feel safe, that they knew what happened to my mom and they didn't feel safe to speak up about it. Or maybe even their involvement was forced, as well. And so they would be incriminating themselves or something. I don't know. Your imagination can go 100 different directions. And I've probably imagined thousands of scenarios.
Right. And was John well known in your mom's circles? Did like everybody know him and know of him and everything?
I'm not sure. I know several people knew of him, and but I don't know how tight he was in my mom's circle.
And when we spoke with Lieutenant Hayes, he mentioned that John might be in Mexico now. Do you think that changes anything for anyone else in the area who may have information?
I hope so. I hope folks that had bits or pieces of information feel safe enough to come forward, or, to share even anonymously, what they heard or what they knew. Over the years, people have messaged me on social media. Somebody messaged me once and said when she was young and dumb and drugging in Grande, she was up in the mountains and somebody told her, if you ever work for the police in Grande regarding the drugs here, you'll end up in the bottom of a hole on the top of Mount Emily, like Leona. And so she was very specific about in a hole, working with the police with drugs, and my mom, being that my mom's name. And I think, those rumors came from somewhere.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff to process. I mean, how do you compartmentalize all of the different rumors and the things that you know to be fact?
I'm not sure if I do. I'm not sure if I do. I think there's a lot of disassociating. It gets really hard sometimes. I have a hard time. Yeah, it gets hard. I can compartmentalize it sometimes as far as what I can do now is limited, and moving forward. But at the time of my mom's disappearance, I didn't have the time or the resources to stop living. I had 3 small children that depended on me. As it was, when I went to my mom's house and came home, I went there like the first week of November, got there like November 9th. It had taken me that long. Like, I had to wait 2 weeks to get paid. It took me a little bit to get the resources to go there. And a lot of it is a blur. A lot of it is just blurry. But I couldn't stop working. As it was, I came home from that trip and my lights were shut off and I was late on my rent, and I had to try and figure that out. I couldn't take the time that I needed at that time to cope with it. And a lot of our families can't. It takes time, and there really wasn't any. And I had a really strong, naive, disillusioned sense of what happens when somebody is reported missing, of what law enforcement can and can't do, what resources they have, and how you process a case like this. Like, I admittedly had these television ideas of what would happen in my head, and I had a lot of faith that they would find her.
And earlier, Tim had mentioned Lieutenant Jason Hayes, who we spoke to on a previous episode, and you just mentioned law enforcement, and you had all of these preconceived notions based on what we all see in the media and on television. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Lieutenant Hayes and how that came to be, and I guess what your impression is of the department? Because when we spoke with him, it's so rare for us to have a member of law enforcement on who's actively investigating a cold case, especially one from 1999. That's something that he clearly was just so dedicated to bringing some conclusion to. What's your working relationship with him and the department?
Starting with the department, when I first reported my mom's case, or reported my mom missing, picking up the phone, like, I remember the phone feeling so heavy and not really being able to speak. Like, everything that I said came out in a whisper. I couldn't push enough. I couldn't make a voice. And the detective at that time, so I have to draw this comparison. The detective at that time was a jerk. He was insensitive. I didn't feel like he cared at all. He hung up on me once. I quit reaching out to them because he was so, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to talk to them. I'm not going to talk to him. And it took a while. After a couple of years, I would call and ask for updates, and the case had changed. Detective Shaw was working her case at that time, and he would take the time to talk to me. He was pretty compassionate and take the time to listen to me and give me updates, and I appreciated that. So Shaw was like night and day compared to our first detective. And I started talking to and working with Hayes maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And over the last 2 years, he's been very receptive to, what we've requested, or answering questions, or looking into things. And I appreciate that so much. I'll probably never feel like all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed in my mom's case. And some of them are too late to go back and do. But I appreciate, his willingness to work with me, to work with Light the Way, to take the time to help get the word out and speak with, with folks like you.
Great. Yeah. And how has the Light the Way group helped you?
Well, I was introduced to them through Melinda Jetterberg, who I went to high school with, and she also works on the Finley Creek Jane Doe Task Force. And so we were in contact through social media, and she volunteered or offered to help in my mom's case. And I can't say how much I appreciate her and her resources that she had with with Finley Creek Jane Doe, and how much progress she made on that, and connecting me with different podcasts and connecting me with Light the Way, and kind of really being able to be the boots on the ground in Grande that I can't. I wouldn't have connected with them had it not been with her. And, Light the Way's we have a group chat going, and anytime I have a question or a concern or something, pops into my head, we can talk about those things. And so they've been able to advocate for me or for my mom in ways that I was never able to separate the emotional stress, and my own anger and frustration. I can be angry and frustrated with them and not shut them down or sound or look crazy, and they can carry that. They can represent what I'm feeling a little bit more tactfully than I can.
It's always good to have a group of people that can be confidently in your corner and able to feel comfortable enough to say, I get where your emotions are coming from, but we might need to tone this phrase down a little bit and pull back over here. So they're super. They're an amazing organization, just so full of like passion and empathy that it's really moving. Part of the conversation, though, when you were just speaking about your frustrations, it was something that you had mentioned before we actually started recording. You said that there are spiritual factors that people don't understand, that law enforcement, they don't understand. And I just found that so fascinating and kind of bittersweet. Is there a way that you can explain this? What are the spiritual factors?
I was always taught growing up that there are things in this world that we just can't see. That there's more, there's more than I can see. And there's things that have happened in my life and in my journey with my mom that to me are undeniable. There's a feeling that you get when something is more spiritual or a message or has meaning than when something is coincidence. And often there's other things that validate it, like before or after that, that they sound crazy and people can be skeptical, but I was not raised that way. I was raised to have faith and belief in some of these things. And one of the things was, when I was really little, my mom and I would, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. And, we would close our eyes and we would take our turns guessing and thinking. And whenever I would think of my, guess her number, she would, is that what you've seen? What did you see? What did you hear? And so I would, if I guessed 9 and I was wrong, she would ask, well, what did you see? What did you hear? What was your other number? And so often it was my next number, it was I tossed around between a couple of them in my head. And so I think that really helped me kind of tune in or learn how to listen, learn how to see or hear those messages with her. After a while, we got really good, and it would be 1 and 15, thinking of a number between 1 and 15, red or black. And we were really good. It was kind of like our trick. She would, let's do it, let's show him we can do it. And so that's just an example, kind of that spiritual connection. Like I said, the day I found out about my mom, I cried all day. I woke up that morning crying. I cried all day. It wasn't until I went home to my mom's house, I went in and it felt like I was just waiting for her. Like she went to the store and I got there early and she was going to walk in the door any minute. And after a few minutes, half an hour or so, I started walking around the house, but I felt like I was snooping. I felt like I shouldn't be going in her room. I shouldn't be, in her things. And I went in and laid down on her bed and looked at the bookshelf next to her bed and just started crying. And smelling her, pulling her pillows up to my face and smelling her. And I looked down and her purse was there. And I knew, I just knew my mom didn't leave without her things, I knew she was gone at that point, and I knew that the day that I had been crying was goodbye. That it was, I'm sorry, it was regret, it was goodbye. And, just that feeling, I just knew. When I was really young, we were sitting in the car and we were listening to a funeral on the radio, and it was a big funeral like Elvis or Lennon. And we were talking about death, and I told her I didn't ever want her to die. And she said, it's the cycle of life, sweetie. Nobody lives forever. We all die. Our body is just a shell, and it's not meant to live forever. But the part of me that loves you, that will always be here. And, we were talking about this funeral, and I said, well, when you die, I'm going to have a big funeral. I want everybody to come and say they love you. And she said, oh, that's not what I want. And I said, well, what? What do you want? And she said she just wanted to go out into the woods and let the beetles and the bugs and the coyotes feed their babies with her body. And that was the cycle of life. And that was traditionally what would have happened with our bodies, was that it would go back into the earth, and the trees would, we would, nurture the trees and the animals, and that was natural. And it was mortifying to my little girl brain, that my mom would no, not an option. And so she said, fine, you can cremate me. And I still, I don't want you to die. I don't want you to ever die. And she said, well, close your eyes. And so I closed my eyes, and she said, am I still here? And I said, yes. And she said, how do you know? And I said, because I can hear you. And she's like, okay, close your eyes. And so we sat there for a couple minutes, and then she said, okay, open your eyes. And she said, could you hear me? And I said, no. And she said, could you see me? And I said, no. And she said, how do you know I was still here? And I said, I could feel you. And she goes, okay, when my body's not here, the part of me that loves you will always be here with you. And I still can feel her at times. It's a different feeling now. Sometimes it's very pride, I feel that she's proud, or she's proud of me. Or I feel like I'm walking down the sidewalk and I'm not walking fast enough, and she's behind me. Somebody's behind me, and they're trying to push me out, speed me out of the way. They're trying to hurry up, pick up the pace. And I feel like that's her. But I also just really feel like she's just in the other room, and we're working. And once in a while I can hear her bang around over there, or once in a while something comes through. But for the most part, I'm busy and she's busy, but we're still in the same house. We just don't see each other anymore.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite profound. Thank you for sharing that. Does your spiritual connection with your mom help you in the grieving process?
I don't know that I could have got through some of this without that conversation in the car. I don't know why my whole life it was so vivid. I thought everybody had conversations like that. Like everybody's parents taught them about life and death like that, and I didn't realize how much of a gift that was, but it's allowed me to find some comfort in, the chances of us finding her, that there's no place she would rather be. She wanted that. She wanted to be out in the woods. She was okay with not being put in a box somewhere, but that was okay. So that's allowed me, a lot of kind of some comfort. Also wondering if she knew, if our spirits knew what we signed up for. I've been taught that our spirits make these sacred promises to one another from the spirit world, that we come from star people. And before we come here to our human bodies, our spirits choose our path, and we make promises to one another. All of our spirits have made sacred promises to do something, teach something, help in some way, to protect or guide, or something that our spirits only know. And I wondered, I've always wondered, when we chose this path, did we choose this? Like maybe we chose our purpose, but not how we get there. Not what has to happen to us to learn how to do what our purpose was. But that message, I don't know that I could do anything that I do or find any kind of peace or comfort in or purpose, without knowing that she's okay. She would be okay out there in the woods.
You said that was the conversation that you had with your mom in the car, was this gift that you thought every child had with their parents and having a discussion about death, but that's not the case. It's a very hard subject for parents to breach with their children. And I'm thinking about my childhood and how, like, you didn't mention it. Like, you didn't talk about it. Anything slightly uncomfortable, we don't talk about. And it just is remarkable to me to hear you recognize that, like, as a gift. And that story was amazing. And I'm wondering if all of this with your mom's disappearance and your spiritual path and your spiritual journey and experiences, this has shaped you into the person that you are, and you communicate all of this so articulately. And I'm wondering if this is something that you accept. Like, this happened to my mom. It all sort of led up to this. She knew that she didn't want to be put in a box. She knew she would, she was at peace with the fact that if my body goes into the forest and is, worked into the whole organic system, that's fine. That was something she communicated to you, and that, is this all sort of meant to be in your head, and or is it? I mean, I'm just kind of jumbling up the question right now, but are you content with this being your path?
My human body didn't choose it. I think, we don't know. I don't think when we choose our paths, we get to choose the experiences that take us to our purpose. But I think I accept that, that we all have a purpose here. At one point or another, those purposes might change. My purpose might be to help somebody else today, and everything in my life has led me to cross the paths with that person or them with me. But I think sometimes when I think about that, I think of the sacrifice that my mom made, that to give me these teachings, to put me in the position to be where I am, to help other people, the sacrifices that she made to be in the position where she was, because she didn't have, the trauma in her life wasn't, it wasn't easy.
So where do you go from here, Carolyn?
I had an elder, when I first started talking about this, I couldn't even say my name without crying. I would introduce myself. My name is Carolyn DeFord. My mother is Leona Kinsey. My mom is a missing person. And I usually couldn't get past my mom's name, and I would cry for a few minutes, exercising that muscle, I guess, to be able to speak. But I was talking to an elder, and I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't talk in public. I don't know what to say. I can't do it. She said, just speak from the heart, and, it's your turn. It's your time. And who are you to question the doors that Creator opens for you? So who am I to question the direction that I'm guided to? I just try to do the best thing that I can and ask, in a prayerful way, and try to honor my family, honor my community, honor my mom, to do no harm. Just try and follow the path that's put in front of me in the best way possible.
And where should somebody be directed if they have any information on your mom's disappearance?
I don't have the 1-800 number in front of me, but there's the Crime Stoppers has an anonymous tip line, and Crime Stoppers has put up a $2,500 reward, and the Puyallup Tribe has a $7,500 reward. So total, there's $10,000 leading to the arrest and conviction for information in my mom's case. They could reach out to the Grande Police Department. Yeah, any information in her case is appreciated. And sometimes it's just little bits, people who knew Juan. Juan, he bragged about what he did to certain people and threatened certain people, that he would, I'll do you like I did Leona. So we know that there's probably more people out there that, maybe he said something that they didn't take serious, or that they thought he was just talking.